Now we are going to move to the next session, which is a fireside chat on preparing learners to succeed in the age of AI. I think it might address some of the questions that were raised even in the last panel. We are going to have Elizabeth Reynolds, who's the Executive Director of MIT's Industrial Performance Center. She's also on the MIT Task Force on the Work of the Future, which was launched here last year. And Dr. Joseph Aoun, who's the President of Northeastern University. I'd like to welcome them both to the stage.
Thank you. Good morning.
Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning to President Aoun. Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor and a privilege to be on stage with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The conference, of course, is called AI and the Future of Work. I think President Aoun brings to this conversation AI, the future of work, and the future of higher education. And if you see, we need a picture of his book up there. I don't know what's going on. Robot-Proof Higher Education in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. President Aoun, maybe you could start with telling us why you wrote this book and some of its main themes.
Well, I wrote this book because there is an opportunity here for higher education to rethink what we are doing. And what I'm saying in the book is very simple. I mean, you heard, where is Andy? Andy and Eric are here, and Andy wants me to give him positive reinforcement all the time. So they're absolutely right. And so you heard about how machines, how AI is going to transform work, and the question, and also how new jobs are going to be created. And the question becomes for higher education, what is the purpose of higher education? What is our mission? Our mission is to help people become robot-proof. And how do you become robot-proof? It's a journey. So what I'm saying that the journey should start by mastering that every learner in higher education should start by mastering what I call Humanics. Humanics is the integration or the convergence of three literacies: tech literacy, understanding machines and how to interact with machines. The second one is data literacy, understanding the sea of information being generated by machines. And the third, and the most fundamental, is the human literacy, what we do that machines cannot do as well for the foreseeable future, or cannot do at all. For instance, the ability to be creative, innovative, entrepreneurial, culturally agile, the ability to work with a team, the ability to be global, the ability to be empathetic, and the ability to also move your understanding from a context to another and negotiate the infinity of context. So we start your robot-proof journey starting by mastering Humanics, and which is the integration of the three literacies. And the question becomes, how do you do it? You can spend hours and days studying, cultural agility, studying innovation, entrepreneurship, creativity, etc. But if you don't put it in a real-world context, you're not going to understand it. And that's where experiential education becomes key. So I'm advocating that for experiential education that will allow you to integrate the classroom experience, if you want, with the world experience. But also it gives us another advantage, as I mentioned, that experiential education is about transferring and transposing your knowledge and refining it from a context to another. That gives us an edge over machines that do not know how to negotiate the infinity of context. So far we have two steps, in Humanics and at the same time experiential education. But we know that machines are going to become ever more performing, smarter, displace more jobs, and create new ones. Therefore, we need to start focusing on lifelong learning in higher education. And two things very quickly. Higher education looked at lifelong learning as a second-class operation. We do it, on the side, and we haven't integrated that in our thinking. And we are in a situation where 76% of the learners are already lifelong learners. So what we call the undergrads represent only a small fraction of the learners. And we are ignoring this large demand. And we're just becoming like the railway industry, where the railway industry said, the airline revolution is not my business, and they didn't think of themselves as being in the transportation business. We may be in the same situation. So robot-proof is a journey, and we in higher education have an obligation and an opportunity to help learners worldwide make it happen.
Well, maybe this is a time to bring forward one of the quotes in the book. You write that existing models of higher education have yet to adapt to the seismic shifts rattling the foundations of the global economy. So why has higher education had such a tough time adjusting, and what does it need to do?
In the long run, higher education will do it, and we are seeing signs of that. But we have to realize that we are a very conservative sector. We want to change the world, but we don't want to change ourselves.
I wonder if there's anybody from the MIT administration here
No, but
to this.
I think it's each one of us.
Right.
Faculty, staff, etc. We're happy with what we have. Why should we change it? So that's. But I think if you look at the history of higher education, the transition from the agrarian model to an industrial model, then the transition from an industrial model to an information model, and hopefully that's now the AI world, the transition to an AI world. In the long run, it will happen. But it's going to be very slow. And this is an opportunity because some people are going to become obsolete and irrelevant. I'm talking here about higher education institutions, and others are going to reap the benefits and be at the vanguard.
This is just out of curiosity, do you see online learning as part of that? How does that fit into this story?
Online learning is a tools to an end. For instance, we studied and experimented with various aspects of online, with the hybrid learning, which is online on-site. But you see, it's a tool that can help you, but clearly it hasn't been sufficient. And also the online has to integrate, and that's what we have done, the experiential component. And why is it a tool that can help you? It can help you because, especially with lifelong learners, lifelong learners are learners who are short on time, long on experience, and therefore the lifelong learning has to be done in a situation where you are personalizing your offerings to the need of the learner. So that means you cannot ask them to come back to college or to the university. They can't do it. So you have to go to them, and to go to them in various forms, various means. And it will lead us to rethink not only our delivery method, but also the way we are shaping our curricula. The notion of degree may become obsolete. The notion of chunking of or certificates or nano certificates or micro certificates or stackable certificates has to be done in such a way that it is personalized to the learner. So with lifelong learning, we have to move to a domain that is completely new for higher education. And that also will slow the whole process.
And is our experience to date informed what we think this should look like in the future? I mean, have we been doing some of this well, or
absolutely.
Not at all?
I mean, the future is always here in some ways, and then you extrapolate. So, we know that long life, for instance, online learning by itself is not enough. I mean, there are various studies based on that. You need that, the hybrid has been superior in its result. You need that, the experiential component, if you run studies with control groups, experiential versus not experiential, the experiential gives you another component. You know that there are various programs that have been done, for instance, for lifelong learning with industry at the table to understand their needs and how we have done that, and based on that, how we can create new approaches, new curricula, etc. So that, lifelong learning will require us to become humble in higher education because we have to listen to the world.
That's tough. That's really a real challenge. Humility. Let me ask you, you oversee a global research university. You have 9 colleges and schools. You yourself are a linguist trained here at MIT under Noam Chomsky and others. And you're clearly a humanist. You have come up with this term humanics, which is, I think, such an interesting concept. And you mention in your book, you say that human literacy, of all the three literacies you talk about, is the one that's most important. How has your background as a social scientist, somebody who studies cognition, informed your understanding of this?
I think that that's what's important is the integration of the three literacies. You see, for instance, in higher education in the United States, there is a big debate between liberal arts versus non-liberal arts. But this is a very defensive debate and frankly becoming stale. Why? Because, what I am advocating here is really the integration of the three literacies. And why am I advocating the human literacy is because that's an edge that we humans have over a machine. If we copy or compete with machines on their turf, we are going to lose. But if they try to copy us for the foreseeable future on our turf, they lose. And that's why, the question is, what can we humans do that machines for the foreseeable future cannot duplicate? And that's why I'm advocating this integration of the three literacies. It's the point that you mentioned in the discussion we were having of convergence. Whereas, in higher education, we have been creating silos with, liberal arts versus skills versus et cetera, et cetera.
So we should be advocating Celtic Studies and data science.
Well, it's not, but precisely. The mere fact that you are mentioning Celtic Studies is a good example, because we're advocating the integration of human literacy with the tech literacy and the digital literacy. So whatever you do, for instance, let me give you an example. Let me give you a very simplistic example. All the computer science students at Northeastern go for an improv class. And so you see, look at your face. You're looking at me and saying, why?
Who's paying for that?
And we are paying for that. They are paying for that. I mean, everybody. And the question becomes why. When the dean approached us and said, we are going to do it, why? Because essentially computer scientists are geeks. They know many things with respect to tech, with respect to data, but they don't know how to interact with people, et cetera, et cetera. And so we said, fine, try it. Afterwards, I sat down with the students, and I said, so what did you get? They said, well, it changed the way I think about not only my field, but also about how I interact with people. Because if I can make you laugh, if I can look at you in the eye, can make you laugh, see how you are reacting with me, etc., I can move you to where I want to be. That was fascinating. So that's a simple example. But there are more profound examples, but that's very telling.
And maybe if I can extrapolate from that example, also in our conversation, you were talking about how the system of higher education in the US helps encourage students to be innovative, or helps everyone to sort of contribute in their own way. Does that fit into what you're describing as to how do we train the next generation in terms of this humanics?
Look, as you know, I studied in 3 continents and different systems. And then I came to MIT, and I'm happy to see that nothing has changed at Kresge. It's still the same old Kresge.
Go team.
So, look, the beauty of the American system is that it's a very diverse system. Throughout the world, you have a Minister of Education that is essentially determining what you should do. The curriculum, the outcomes, whether, et cetera. Whereas here we have private universities, we have public universities, we have small liberal arts colleges, we have for-profits, not-for-profits, competing, and that creates a sense of competition, but also experimentation and innovation. So that's at the macro level, and that's good. So you as a learner, you have choices. It's not one size fits all. The second aspect is that, from day one, when you come to an American system of education, from day one, the question is, what are you going to contribute? And that, and not what you can give us in terms of the test, whether you are acing a test or not. And experiential education fits very well there, because experiential education is telling you, you are going to be engaged in the real world, co-ops, in long-term internships, opportunities for global engagement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And let's see how you are going to fare. But also it allows you to understand what you're good at, what you're not good at, to understand how to interact with other people, to understand people in culturally diverse environment, and to become global.
And I know you've been all over the country and also in the world, certainly Europe. Have you seen a lot of difference between how the book is received here as opposed to in Europe, for example?
It's very interesting because, for instance, take the notion of lifelong learning. Okay, lifelong learning in the United States now, I have been advocating for that to integrate that as part of the mission, and I see movement there. In Europe, for instance, it's something different that's happening. The government, and not only in Europe, in Asia too, the government is more sensitive to the impact and the need of lifelong learning. So for instance, the UK is mandating every company that has a certain payroll to put 0.5 percentage point of its payroll for lifelong learning. Now, universities don't know how to do it yet. They haven't integrated that at all. In the United States, we are learning how to do it. In other words, we are at phase 1, they are at phase 0. So the difference, once again, is that we, because we are diverse, because we don't have a mandate, we have various sensitivities and attempts to integrate lifelong learning. And that has changed since I started advocating for that. Whereas in Europe, for instance, it's not the case. In Singapore, it's the case. It's also the government pushing for that.
That's right. You discuss in your book your concern about increasing inequality and what's happening in this country to the middle class, and trends that are, of course, happening here, but as we heard from the last panel, happening around the world. What do you think the response of higher education should be in its
I think
role?
we need to redefine the notion of access. If you talk to any educator in the United States, they tell you access is important for us. And how do they define access? They define access as moving from high school to college. Namely, our mission is to provide access to students who are finishing their high school and let them go to college. That's step one. That's important, but that's not enough. Why? Because if indeed jobs are going to be redefined, jobs are going to be obsolete, and new jobs are going to be created, lifelong learning is needed. Therefore, we need to start thinking about access throughout our lives. And universities are not prepared to do that, as I mentioned to you. And second, government and the policies and the financial aid is not there to focus on that. So I think we have, in order to tackle inequality, people who lose jobs and cannot re-educate themselves, reskill, upskill, are doomed. And therefore, our mission is to provide access for life, whereas we define our mission of access in a very narrow way. Important, but not enough.
Right, and I think that even when people can get over the hurdle of the cost of access into college, then the question is staying in and graduating and finishing.
We are seeing something interesting. Because lifelong learning is has not been fully integrated, and there is no financial aid for that, and people are trying to get into that. We are seeing a drop in the cost with respect of lifelong learning programs. Nationwide, through the Coursera's of this world, through the various attempts of various universities, to provide masters at, like Georgia Tech at a very low cost, or, people saying, if we move into certificates, then we can price it differently. So you are seeing that happening. But what will help enormously with respect to inequality too is to provide this lifelong learning access and to extend also financial aid on a lifelong learning basis. So for instance, various countries now are discussing, the possibility of having a portable lifelong learning account. Right. Because you cannot rely on the employer. The employers actually are doing less of the re-educating, lifelong learning, upskilling, and reskilling. Why? Because in the United States, the average tenure of an employee is 4 years. In Silicon Valley, it's 2 years. So people are looking at it saying, it's not worth it for me as an employer to invest in lifelong learning. And plus, if you add the gig economy, that is, where you have millions and millions of people involved in the gig economy, there is no employer, and there is no one to take care of that. And that's the opportunity for higher education, and indeed the obligation.
It's interesting that you mentioned employers. Obviously, Northeastern is one of the leaders of the co-op model in this country, if not in the world. What do you think what do you hear from employers about what they're looking for?
It's very simple. We survey employers on a yearly basis. As you mentioned, we have a system of experiential education where students go for 6 months on co-ops in 136 countries and 3,000 employers worldwide. And we survey them. We did one with Gallup, and the results are very simple. The employers actually are looking for people who are very proficient in STEM or tech or data literacy, but also people who are able to interact with other people, people who are creative, entrepreneurial, people who are culturally agile. And, when they hire a person, they're investing in her, and they are, and just to have a person in her silo is not enough. They say, we don't want that. That's not of interest to us. Because ultimately you become obsolete with your silo too.
But of course, as you point out, isn't higher education sort of designed around silos?
Exactly, and that's a beauty, and that's an opportunity. So the institutions and the programs that will bring people and across silos are going to be the winners. And from this perspective, you were asking me about change in higher education, and we are very bizarre in the way we approach change. We want consensus. We want people to, our faculty colleagues to vote on that, and then we start doing it. Whereas, in fact, you have great colleagues here who have worked on change, and every time there is a change, let me be simplistic enough, you have the naysayers on one side, you have the early adopters on the other side, and you have the large majority are people who are essentially in a wait and see. Right. So what do we do in higher education? We say we want everybody to agree before we start something. Whereas if we believe really in academic freedom, and if we believe in a culture of experimentation, empower the early adopters, let them run with it, let them be proof, and then the rest can choose to follow or not. And so it's not breaking the silos in toto in one fell swoop. Shake it by fostering innovation, fostering experimentation in what we do.
And I assume you've been doing this at Northeastern.
I hope, yes.
Hopefully received well. If you are looking ahead and saying, what does success look like for higher education, at least in this country, in responding to this moment, if you will, in this technological moment, what would success look like?
Look, we have to start integrating Humanics, and that's not a very profound statement, because Humanics, as I mentioned, is the integration of the tech literacy, data literacy, and the human literacy in everything we do, and not have a course, as you said, in Celtic Studies and another course in tech, but how you can bring them together. There is a notion, for instance, at Northeastern, the demand now is for combined majors, not double majors, combined majors, which are precisely based on this integration. So that's step one. The second is experiential. We have many universities from the United States and all over the world asking, how to do experiential. But the final point is really, and the opportunity for higher education is lifelong learning, because if 76% of the learners are lifelong learners, and last year in the United States, only 36% of the universities and colleges filled their seats. Only 36%.
Well, what does that suggest about some rationalization down the road?
Well, you are seeing a movement of bankruptcies, mergers, acquisitions, and unfortunately, it's hitting small liberal arts colleges first.
Right. What about community colleges? We hear a lot about community colleges in this country. We've got such a large system of them. Where do they fit into this?
Community colleges have been traditionally a great mechanism to allow social mobility. Right. I was interviewing a faculty that I recruited from Stanford in another institution, and he told me that he had his start in a community college. Now, what happened with, if you look on a macro level at community colleges in the nation, we defunded the community colleges first, then we defunded the state institutions, then the universities, the state colleges, because you have a three-tier system in general. Right. And we kept, in order to preserve the jewel such as the UC, etc. So they have great needs, but also it's an opportunity for them to rethink their curricula and their presence. And also it's an opportunity for us in research universities, in higher education, to push more for articulation agreement in order to allow access. Remember we talked about access as being very narrowly defined. Right. We have to extend access lifelong, and that will be part of that. But also, frankly, we need to do something more with high schools and K through 12. For instance, I know that many of you here have been advocating for some computer literacy in high schools and elementary schools, etc. And we have a role to play, helping experiential education to be integrated. We gather 300 school systems to help them there. But also look at what's happening from this perspective. The students are coming from to college now. Coding is becoming like typewriting. They don't even know what typewriting is, but coding is becoming like typewriting. Not they all, but every year you see more and more having that. So how did it happen? You had organizations that, such as code.org, such as universities that are involving themselves. So that's a positive aspect of the impact that we can have. Similarly, work with the community colleges. We just received a large grant from the NSF to allow community colleges to focus on STEM and also to continue after that. So there are examples, and every university will give you examples of that, but essentially, education is a K to gray endeavor. And our role is to help this endeavor.
Fantastic. Well, perhaps on that note, we'll wrap up and thank you very much, President Aoun.
Thank you.